It's interesting when you talk about you were a lead negotiator. I mean, when this all started, and you resigned, he lashed out. He called you totally toxic, not at all conducive to making deals. I'm sure you saw the post. She will not be missed. And of course, you could be coming back as prime minister.
Hey everybody, I am currently dealing with the worst snowstorm that's supposed to be hitting Ontario, so whether this video comes out or not all depends on if I have the internet. But with that being said, in the previous video, I mentioned how all the premiers were in Washington to talk to representatives. They were going to be meeting with the White House officials to kind of bolster their defense on the whole tariff situation. Now, in my opinion, the tariff response has been horrible from all parties. And we even had a terrible messaging from Freeland as well as Justin Trudeau. He had a chance to talk to JD Vance, and it sounds like the guy just blew it. Take a listen.
Hi, Rachel Yellow, CTV News. What was JD Vance's response when you brought up steel in Ohio, and did you two talk about anything else?
It was just a quick greeting exchange. I highlighted that $2.2 billion worth of steel and aluminum exports from Canada go directly into the Ohio economy, often to contribute to manufacturing that happens there. He nodded and noted it, but it wasn't a longer exchange than that.
Now, Justin and JD Vance weren't in Washington. They were actually in Paris for this AI summit. But the way Justin's making it sound like is he just approached JD and then verbal diarrhea about steel and Ohio and how much it would suffer. And this is because JD Vance is from Ohio. But it just seems like Vance said, okay, cool, like, yeah, I hear what you're saying, and then just walked away. Like, pretty embarrassing. But as I mentioned, Freeland also decided to go on CNN and just talk about how she's the right person to deal with Trump and how she would fight him.
Our retaliation is going to be a lot more surgical than that. We are going to go after American stakeholders who matter to the White House. I have proposed a 100% tariff on all Teslas. I am calling on all the countries that are affected by this tariff to join us, and our retaliation will target specific Trump constituencies. Another group that we're going to go after is Wisconsin dairy farmers. We know how important they are for the president, and we're not going to let them sell their products in Canada anymore. But I also want to say to you, Aaron, we don't have to do this. Yeah. We have a balanced, mutually beneficial relationship with the United States. We think the best path is to continue with that relationship. I was Canada's lead negotiator the last time Trump was president, and we had a lot of fighting and a lot of insults. But at the end of the day, the tariffs were lifted by the United States. We got a trade agreement that Trump said was the best deal ever. And today, the president campaigned on saying he was going to go after China. He campaigned on saying China is an unfair participant in the global economy and has overcapacity in steel and aluminum. We think the president is right about that. We do not want to have a fight with you. We would prefer to be your partner, and we can be a great partner. But if you hit us, we're going to hit you back.
Now, talking like this has to be some sort of liberal mind virus, because in Ontario here, we even have the Liberal representative, Bonnie Crombie, going out and saying this to the media when questioned about tariffs.
And ensure that we have local procurement. We've also created what we call the Fight Tariff Fund, the FTF, or, F Trump Fund, too, however you want to take it.
Now, in my opinion, the main person who's been dealing with this the best is Danielle Smith. We've even seen Scott Moe kind of moving towards more of a Danielle Smith aspect of things. But just take a look at her rub this in all the premiers' faces, basically, because prior to them meeting with the White House officials, they did a one-on-one answer and question type of thing with the media. But just listen to her statement before getting questions.
Can I just say first a couple of things. I think diplomacy is working. I think that the fact that we got a 30-day reprieve was because we agreed to work on the cross-border problem of fentanyl. I was pleased to see the federal government announced a fentanyl czar, and my administration has already been in touch with him to talk about how in Alberta we can lend to the success of those efforts. So what I would say is what I've seen from this president is that he is prepared to make a deal. We've made a deal on that. I think we can make a deal on steel and aluminum by making very much the same argument that I've been making on energy and critical minerals. We've won the argument that those raw materials are essential to American success. It comes in, it makes value-added products, it creates good American jobs, it creates good American products that we buy back. Same thing for aluminum. They just do not make enough for their defense industry, their auto industry, and their critical needs. So I think aluminum, we can make the very same argument. And on steel, we buy as much steel products from them as they buy from us.
Now, I thought that was absolutely priceless, her standing there in front of all the other premiers basically saying, I told you so. I was right and you guys were wrong. And this was all done before they met with the White House correspondents. Now, we'll get to when they came out of the White House and talked to the media in a second. But something that Danielle admitted was that she's already reached out to the fentanyl czar, and this guy was just appointed. So this woman is so proactive in trying to put her best foot forward to protect that border, to show Trump that they're actually willing to work at the issues at hand. And a lot of people are still questioning, why do we even need this fentanyl czar? It's only 43 kilos, yada, yada, yada. Well, a few days ago, Rosemary Barton actually had this gentleman on where he disputes every claim that they keep saying about the 43 kilos. Just take a listen.
Our public safety minister says that Canada will have a new fentanyl czar before this tariff deadline comes into place at the beginning of March. What do you make of the decision by the Canadian government to take this new position, and what would you hope the role would accomplish?
Well, I think it's quite constructive and proactive, not just reactive. I think that, Canada has to focus on the fact that it's losing thousands of young people a year to illicit fentanyl.
One of the things that we have pointed to a lot over the past couple of weeks when responding to the president is the amount of fentanyl that crosses from Canada to the U.S., which is, as you know, very small. It was 43 pounds was seized at that border. But I understand you think that is not sort of something that we should be focusing on, the fact that it's a small amount, particularly compared to Mexico. Give me your thoughts.
Well, several months ago, you had the biggest lab in the history of the world, taken over by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police in Vancouver. We'd never even seen anything like this. It made Breaking Bad look like, minor league. So that, and definitely where there was Chinese organized crime, possibly Iran as well. The facts have not been released by your government. It's sort of astonishing that they haven't provided more information publicly, but I think they know they're sitting on a big scandal here. The fact that this thing emerged and it's tied into these biker gangs who've been hired to go down to the United States in some cases and assassinate people like, my former boss, Secretary Mike Pompeo, President Trump, and others. This is another whole level of scandal involving it. But the key thing to focus on is that someone was making over 100 million doses of deadly fentanyl in a lab that you didn't know about right under your nose. Now, how many other labs do you think you have going? And let me focus on one last thing. There's very little border enforcement. So 42 kilograms, it's a nonsensical number. We don't have, most of the drugs are going from Mexico to Canada and then being brought south into the Northwest United States on ships. You have almost no port enforcement with police. So we have no idea, except from our sources, what's going on. And we hear some bad things.
Now, Rosemary Barton and a bunch of other media outlets keep parroting this whole 43 kilos thing, but the CBC themselves reported on this super lab bust, which I'm going to play in a second. But even in that report, they stated that 54 kilos was found. Now, that didn't cross because it was seized, but who's to say more hasn't been produced? They don't know about all the labs that are across the country. They can't track all of it all. So for them to continuously parrot this makes no sense. But as I said, this was their report on that whole situation.
The RCMP calls this a super lab, producing an unprecedented amount of illicit drugs. In total, they recovered almost 400 kilos of meth, 54 kilos of fentanyl, that's tens of millions of doses, plus smaller amounts of MDMA and cocaine. And that's just the stuff that was ready, waiting to be shipped out. Investigators say this lab had enough source material on hand to potentially triple that output.
These enforcement actions have undoubtedly saved thousands of lives in Canada. It has also served to deny this transnational organized crime group an estimated $485 million in profits.
And this wasn't just about drugs. 400 kilometers away in Surrey, BC, they also say they recovered 46 handguns, 21 AR-15 style rifles, 14 submachine guns, at least two 50 caliber rifles capable of shooting through concrete walls, explosives, body armor, and $500,000 in cash.
So with that being said, I do find it rich that they keep constantly saying it's less than 1%, when they can't track it. They can't tell us for sure that it's less than 1%. But as I was saying, they met with the White House correspondents, and I'm not sure if the premiers weren't on the same page, they didn't talk to each other after the meeting or whatnot, but when the first three premiers came out to talk to the media, this was their response.
We had a very constructive conversation. We appreciate the Trump administration facilitating this literally in the last minute. And we're grateful. We listened, we communicated, and we look forward to further conversations.
Who did you speak with exactly?
I'd rather not disclose that. High-ranking Trump administration.
Is it James Blair, sir? That has been reported already. It'd be great to get a name out there so we can confirm it for the.
Well, I'm not at liberty to say, to be frank with you, but it's a very high-ranking administration.
So very hush-hush, very top secret, couldn't really give much information. Yet right behind these guys was David Eby, and listen to what he said.
Oh, this way?
What do you think? What if you didn't pop in, Premier?
This is last minute. No, but
Premier Eby, who did you meet with and what did you talk about?
We had good conversations with the Deputy Chief of Staff, and he's also the head of policy, and as well as Sergio is doing the hiring for a lot of the White House staff, senior White House advisors.
Premier Eby, I think the public might find it weird that you're not saying who you met with. Was there some sort of agreement that you weren't going to name the officials? Like, why can't you just tell us who you met with?
Yeah, no, it's James Blair and Sergio. I forget Sergio's last name. He's the head of personnel for the White House. No, that's all right. Yeah, no, I understand they would find that weird.
Now, either David Eby didn't get the message that he wasn't supposed to say anything, or the other three premiers were just putting on this facade that it was so top secret. Whatever the case may be, this is a complete clown show. We need more transparency, more understanding about what actually is going on. David Eby did give a little bit of insight, saying that the representatives told him really take Trump seriously because he means what he says.
It was a good conversation. I thought it was constructive. There were some very frank moments across the table, and they urged us to take the president at his word. And so we will certainly do that.
Now, regardless if that's true or not, we all know Trump is a bit of a wild man. So one day he could say no tariffs, the next day he can say there are tariffs. But us not having a proper government in place is just leaving us completely vulnerable and in shambles. So I don't think that's beneficial in any which way. Now, some people seem to think Carney will be the best person to deal with Trump. But we're starting to see more and more videos coming out exposing who Carney really is. I did mine not too long ago, but we just had this one from the Conservative member Frank Caputo. Take a look.
This guy is telling us that he should be prime minister, and he's using his record as governor of Bank of England as to why we should just hand over the keys to 24 Sussex to him. So let's look at this a little bit so you know exactly what you're getting here with Mark Carney. Mark Carney was the governor from 2013 to 2020. He printed too much money. You think we have a problem with inflation now? This guy was responsible for the record inflation, the inflation that was the highest in the G7 during his tenure at the Bank of England. That's just ridiculous. So if you want to know how bad his money printing was, at one point, Mark Carney had injected 59% new cash into the economy. Now that leads to what we call inflation. Sounds kind of like someone we know, Justin Trudeau. Did you ever see the graphs that show how everything went up as soon as Justin Trudeau was elected? Well, for the UK, you might as well insert Mark Carney's name where Justin Trudeau's was, and you would have the exact same result. Trudeau, Carney, same problem. Increase in poverty levels here. 150% rise in the percentage of people living under the international poverty line. Let's not forget, this guy said he saved 2 economies. 150% increase of people in poverty, and that's what he calls saving 2 economies.
Now, a lot of this is starting to sound a little familiar to Canada, seeing as we have one of the highest poverty rates we've ever seen so far. Well, I think it's reported still 1 in 4 Canadians are under the poverty line. Food bank usage skyrocketing. Like, we can go through the stats over and over again. Things have been getting worse. And this actually ties into a few weeks ago, I think late January, when Countersignal met up with the former Prime Minister of the UK who dealt with Mark Carney and asked her opinion on what they think about Canada having him as their next Prime Minister. Now, Brian Lilley from the Toronto Sun also interviewed her. I'm going to play them back to back, and then we'll talk about that.
Just wanting to get your thoughts on Mark Carney and your relationship with him while you were Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, and any advice you have to Canadians who think he might make a good Prime Minister.
Well, Mark Carney was Governor of the Bank of England, and under his tenure, too much money was printed, which did damage to the British economy and put our economy off track. He, at the last election, endorsed Rachel Reeves' economic policy. She's now become Chancellor. It's been a disaster for Britain. The country is heading for bankruptcy. So I would strongly recommend not backing Mark Carney or his policies on net zero, which have been disastrous for Britain and would be disastrous for Canada.
Do you trust his judgment overall, outside of ideological considerations?
Well, I believe that he made major mistakes in the management of the Bank of England. He has pushed net zero, which has been a disaster, not just for the UK, but for many countries across the world.
Ms. Strauss, thanks for your time. Tell us, you crossed paths with Mark Carney at a few points when he was bank governor and you held various positions within the British government. What was your sense of him? He gets a hero's welcome in Canada for his role with Stephen Harper and Jim Flaherty during the 2008-2009 financial crash. He doesn't have the same stellar reputation with everyone in Britain, does he?
I mean, if you look at the record of the Bank of England over the past decades, it has been poor. There was huge amounts of quantitative easing, huge amounts of printing money.
Which is just a fancy way of saying print money, right?
Correct, yeah, printing money. And also a huge bulge in public spending, which that enabled. He was also a major advocate of net zero, and Britain has probably gone further than any other country down the net zero route, and it's been disastrous for our economy. So if you're looking at reasons why the British economy has stagnated, why people's income per capita is now lower than Mississippi, which is the poorest state in America, I think a lot of the fingers can be pointed at the Bank of England. Huge amounts of printing money, too much inflation, diverting resources away from the productive economy, but also Mark Carney had a role in pushing the disastrous net zero agenda, which has been very, very damaging for Britain's oil and gas industry. And we now have the highest energy prices in the world. We now have the fastest rate of millionaires leaving our country of any country in the world apart from China. We've seen industry closed down. So we saw the last steelworks that produced steel from scratch closed down last year. We're seeing the oil and gas industry closing down. And we are at serious risk now of a financial crisis because the expected tax revenues aren't coming in, because taxes are too high, it's driving away business, and she has spent huge amounts on the state. So if Mark Carney intends to apply those types of policies to Canada, it would be a disaster.
Now, I don't know about you, but that doesn't sound like a very glowing recommendation or referral from somebody who probably worked with Carney quite regularly. So doesn't really look good on him there. But if you listen to the end of her interview with Brian Lilley, she was talking about the last steelworks processing plant that just shut down last year in the UK. That might be the next reality here in Canada, especially with these tariffs that were announced from Trump. But Pierre pointed out what Carney was talking about in regards to steel the other day on CTV. Take a listen.
with Mr. Carney's carbon tax. This is another thing. Carney told CTV about 10 days ago he's going to bring in a new carbon tax on Canadian industry.
What the big companies are producing, by and large, are not products that we are consuming. There's some element of that, but by and large, a steel company, how much steel are you using these days?
He mentioned steel. Can you imagine what it would do to our country if at the same time Donald Trump hits our steel industry with a tariff, Mark Carney brings in a massive new carbon tax? My friends, under Mark Carney, there will be no steel making in Canada, and we will lose the most fundamental strategic building block of an economy and, frankly, our national security.
Now, we all know this Carbon King is a bit of a nut when it comes to these green policies. And just like the former PM of the UK was saying, oil, gas, and steel all got affected by this guy. I can definitely see that happening here, which would be terrifying because he most likely will be the prime minister in the next few weeks. Now, it's up to him whether he wants to call an election or not. However, a lot of people are trying to dismiss that this election is no longer a carbon tax election, that Pierre should just get away from that. The carbon tax is still active. Come April 1st, it will rise again. Mark Carney is only going to be in power at the end of March. If he does not call an election come April, the carbon tax is still active and will kick in again. So there will be another rise on the carbon tax. That's point blank. They can keep saying that they're going to be getting rid of it, but until they actually do, I don't believe it. But as always, that's just me. Love to hear from you guys. Let me know what you think about all this. Maybe I'll see you tomorrow. Who knows? Maybe I'll get stuck in the snowstorm shoveling away for hours on end. But as always, I will catch you guys hopefully on the next one. Thanks so much.